Okay, so let's just dive right in. We're tackling a topic that for the better part of 50 years has been ruled by this really rigid dogma.
Salt.
Salt, exactly. For decades, the message from, everyone has been so monolithic.
Less is always better.
Always. Restricting sodium is it's sold as the guaranteed path to a healthier heart. But what if that idea, the one that's baked into all our health apps and official guidelines, is, well, what if it's just wrong?
And that is the absolute core of what we're looking at today. We're basing this whole deep dive on an incredible position paper by Levine Moten, PhD. It's called To Salt or Not to Salt? That is the question.
Right.
And you see this everywhere. If you ask Google AI or you look at the WHO or the American Heart Association, the AHA, it's all the same.
Universal sodium restriction.
It's universal. They push for, below 2,300 milligrams a day, sometimes even less than 1,500 for certain groups, like older adults.
But Dr. Moten's review, it completely flips that on its head right from the start. His main conclusion, and this is based on actual mortality data, not just proxies.
Right, long-term data.
Is that the safest place for most healthy adults is actually in a moderate zone, 3 to 5 grams a day.
That's 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams. It's a huge difference.
It is.
So this means that the model we've all been taught, this straight line where lower is always safer, it's contradicted by the modern evidence.
So our mission today is to figure out why those old guidelines are so sticky and how these massive new studies support what they call a U-shaped curve for risk.
Exactly. We need to unpack why going too low is just as dangerous as going too high.
Okay, so let's start with the traditional story because, it didn't come from nowhere.
No, it's based on solid science to a point.
It's grounded in this really clear dose-dependent relationship, right? You eat more salt, your blood pressure goes up, and high blood pressure is a huge risk factor for heart disease. So the logic was, it was simple. Lower the salt, lower the blood pressure, lower the risk.
It's simple, elegant math. And maybe, a little too simple. That's what Moten's analysis really drills down on. The whole policy was based on a surrogate marker blood pressure instead of what we actually care about.
Which is heart outcomes, survival.
Right. And these huge new cohort studies, they've forced this massive paradigm shift.
So what are these studies consistently finding?
Well, they find three things, really. First, yes, the old idea is partly right. Risk absolutely goes up at really high sodium intakes. We're talking more than 5 or 6 grams a day.
Okay, so no surprise there.
No. But second, and this is the big one, risk also goes up at very low sodium intakes, so under about 2 or 2.5 grams a day.
So if high is bad and very low is also bad, the safest spot has to be somewhere in the middle.
That's it. That's the 3 to 5 gram zone that Dr. Moten has defined. The old model, the one still on Google, it assumes risk is monotonic, a straight line.
The more salt, the more risk, period.
But the evidence-based curve that Moten is championing is U-shaped. You've got danger on the left at the low end and danger on the right at the high end.
Okay, but if the data is so clear, why is it so hard to change the message? Why are the WHO and the AHA still pushing this low salt for all idea?
Well, there's deep historical inertia. These recommendations are woven into everything. Food labels, medical school training.
It's institutionalized.
Deeply. And, as Moten points out, policy loves a simple surrogate endpoint like blood pressure. It's easy to measure. And short-term trials do show that cutting sodium lowers it.
But those trials weren't designed to look at long-term survival.
Exactly. They were too short, too small. They could tell us what lowers blood pressure, but they couldn't tell us what intake level lets you live the longest, healthiest life.
Which sets us up perfectly to move past those BP trials and look at the studies focused on what you called hard outcomes.
Actual mortality, stroke, heart failure, things that matter. And that's where the conversation really changes. And to do that, you have to look at these massive observational data sets. Moten relies heavily on the PURE study.
The Prospective Urban-Rural Epidemiology Study.
Yes. And it's so important because it's huge, over 100,000 people, and it's global, 18 different countries. So you're getting a real picture of human health, not just one population.
And when PURE tracked all those people over time, what did they find about the ones aiming for those really low salt targets?
It was a bombshell for the low salt paradigm. The people consuming less than about 3 grams of sodium a day, so the people actually following the strictest advice,
The ones doing what they were told.
they actually had higher rates of heart attacks and all-cause mortality than the people in the moderate range.
So they were increasing their risk by trying to be too healthy.
It looks that way. The risk was elevated below 3 grams and also above 5 grams. It perfectly solidified that the sweet spot was that moderate range.
Around 3 to 5 grams a day.
Exactly what Dr. Moten proposes.
Now that's one big study. Is this a one-off finding, or does other evidence back this up?
No, it holds up. There are multiple big meta-analyses now where they combine the data from many studies, and they all find the same U-shaped or J-shaped curve
And they find the same floor, the point where risk starts to go up at the low end.
consistently. Risk starts to climb once you dip below about 2.7 grams a day. All the data keeps pointing to that same moderate middle ground.
Okay, I have to ask about the critiques, because with observational data, there's always the question of reverse causality. Can you just quickly explain what that means here?
It's a really important question. Reverse causality is the idea that, well, are people sick because they eat low salt, or are they eating low salt because they're already sick?
Okay. Like a doctor tells someone with heart failure to cut all salt.
Exactly. Then that person has a bad outcome, and it looks like the low salt diet is to blame, but really the underlying disease was the cause.
So how does Moten's paper address that?
It acknowledges it's a potential issue, but argues that because we see this U-shaped curve in so many different diverse groups of people, even after they tried to statistically remove the sickest individuals, it makes it much more likely that there's a real physiological reason for the risk,
It's not just sick people following doctor's orders, there's a mechanism at play.
a real biological cost to going too low.
That's the perfect lead-in. Let's talk about the science of that curve. If the low end is dangerous, what is happening inside the body that makes it so?
This is where it gets fascinating, because you have to remember, sodium is absolutely essential for life.
It's not a poison.
Not at all. It manages your fluid volume, your nerve signals, your circulation. So when your body senses it's being chronically deprived of sodium, it thinks it's in a survival crisis.
It thinks it's, what, bleeding out or dehydrated?
Precisely. So it hits the big red emergency button.
And what does that look like physiologically?
It activates these really powerful neurohormonal survival systems. The main one is a dramatic ramp-up of something called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAAS for short.
Okay.
You see a big spike in hormones like renin and aldosterone. At the same time, your sympathetic nervous system, your adrenaline system goes into overdrive.
Yeah.
Your body is it's constantly running in emergency mode to hold on to every last bit of salt and water.
We usually hear about things like aldosterone and adrenaline in a bad context, right? Like related to chronic stress.
We do.
So if your body is chronically jacking up these hormones just to survive a low-salt diet, what are the side effects of that?
And that's the trade-off. Woten's paper highlights that this sustained RAAS activation has real metabolic costs. You can actually see worsened insulin sensitivity.
Which raises diabetes risk.
Right, and adverse changes in cholesterol, damage to the lining of your blood vessels, all these things that actively work against the small benefit you might get in blood pressure.
So that's the core conflict. At high intake, the problem is volume overload, too much pressure. But at very low intake, you trade that problem for the damage caused by this constant aggressive hormonal alarm system.
That's the integrated model Moten presents. You have to avoid both dangers. The sweet spot, that 3 to 5 gram range, is where the body is just relaxed. It's not fighting a volume war, and it's not panicking about dehydration. It's in balance.
And the paper doesn't just critique the old system, it gives very clear, actionable targets. So for a general healthy adult, what's the specific number Dr. Moten proposes?
For most healthy people, the target range is 3 to 5 grams of sodium per day.
Which is roughly 7.5 to 12.5 grams of actual table salt, for anyone wondering.
Right. And the reason is simple.
Okay.
That's the zone with the lowest observed mortality. It's purely based on the outcome data, and it keeps you out of that hormonal danger zone.
Okay, but what about people who are already sick? Someone with hypertension or heart failure or chronic kidney disease?
Right. For those groups, the approach has to be individualized and medically supervised. Always. But Moten still argues for a modified approach.
So what's the target for them?
He suggests a target of 2 to 3 grams of sodium per day.
Which is lower, but it's still not that super restrictive 1.5 grams you sometimes hear about. Why the difference?
Because even for very sick patients, that 2 to 3 gram target stays safely above the zone where we see that generalized harm from RAAS activation kick in.
I see.
You still get a beneficial drop in blood pressure coming down from, say, 4 grams to 2.5, but you don't push them so low that their body's hormonal systems start to make things worse, which can be a real risk in heart failure.
So it's about balance, not just blind restriction.
It's all about finding that physiological middle ground.
This all boils down to a pretty clear public health message then.
It does, and it's much simpler, I think. For most people, the goal is to live in the middle. Don't eliminate salt, but avoid the extremes.
So what's a first step for most people?
Just reduce the obvious excesses. Ultra-processed foods, fast foods, salty snacks. That's what pushes people into that high-risk zone above 5 grams. Cut back on that, and you're probably already in a good place.
And there's another piece to this, right? It's not just about what you take out.
No, diet quality is critical. It's not just about sodium. It's the sodium to potassium ratio. The paper strongly emphasizes getting more potassium from fruits, vegetables, legumes.
Which naturally helps balance out sodium's effect on blood pressure.
Exactly. And when you eat more of those foods, you naturally have less room for the high-sodium processed stuff anyway.
So let's just bring this all home one last time. We have a public that is getting advice from these huge digital gatekeepers.
Google, the big health organizations.
And that advice is based on an old blood pressure-focused model that says lower is always better.
And Dr. Nemoden's paper just lays out, with all the evidence, why that guidance is outdated and, for many people, could actually be pushing them into a danger zone.
The low-intake danger zone.
Right, the data is clear. For most healthy adults, optimal health is found by avoiding the extremes and staying in that moderate natural range of 3 to 5 grams a day.
It's just amazing that the simple model, cut all salt, persists so strongly when the evidence points to something more nuanced.
Well, science is demanding we redefine what too low means.
Yeah.
Going from a very high intake of 7 grams down to 4 is a huge win, a lifesaver.
Right.
But pushing a healthy person from 4 grams all the way down to 1.5 is a completely different story. You risk turning on this massive chronic stress response that might be doing more harm than good.
Which really leaves us with a final, and I think a deeply provocative question from all this research. If the data is now so consistent that the sweet spot for avoiding death is this 3 to 5 gram range, what is it going to take for the major global health bodies, the ones with so much invested in the old message, to finally abandon that historical inertia and align their advice with the reality of the modern science?
It really is a question of evidence versus establishment.